Hi, I'm Caden, here with my brother,
Cal,
and you're watching Eating W's.
eat the W.
That's a W. Let's eat one. Let's eat one. That's a W.
On today's episode of Eating W's, we have our 2024 NFL Week 14 prediction episode. We are so far into the season already. The playoff picture is truly starting to mold itself before our eyes. There's already teams clinching their divisions, already teams clinching playoff spots, which is so crazy to think about that we're already this far into the season. We're so far into the season that this is actually the last week with any bye weeks even, which is maybe the craziest thing at all. I mean, we're already so deep into this that bye weeks are over. But bye weeks are going away with a bang with 6 different teams on bye this week. It's kind of a Byepocalypse 2.0 after how it was just not too long ago in week 11 or week 12. I can't remember for sure. But yeah, so lots of byes this week, but last week of byes. But before we keep rolling into those games and start talking about our predictions, just a small update on Cal and I's head-to-head pick'em game. We both had pretty decent week last week, and we actually tied, both putting up 12 total points each last week, which keeps our differential the same and puts us at total points of me with 136 and Callan with 119. So as we close in on the end of the regular season, and especially with so few games being up for grabs this week, it's really kind of starting to look like I'm locking in a regular season win. Regular season wins do not matter. It all comes down to what is at the end of the year. So we'll see if Callan can make up some ground to finish this year off, and especially in the playoffs. So we'll see if he can start making up that ground with this first step of Thursday Night Football and a NFC North matchup with the Green Bay Packers heading to Detroit to take on the Lions. And we start by disagreeing. I have the Lions in this one, and Callan sticks with his Packers.
I had to stick with the Packers in this one. They're on a bit of a roll. They haven't lost a game since they lost to the Lions. So, I mean, I don't know. I guess we're in top 3. We're number 3, a top 3. So, it'll be a really fun game to watch nonetheless. This is really going to be probably a game that possibly decides the NFC North when it comes down to it. Just maybe not this game specifically, but it's going to decide who wins the NFC North at the end of the season. Really, this was a tough one to pick because the Lions are on a roll too. But I've noticed that the Lions have been very susceptible to defeat from NFC North opponents, where the Bears and Vikings both gave them runs for their money. And the Bears really should have beaten them. And we talked about that yesterday, how the clock ran out on them. But if not for that happening, who knows what happens in overtime to the Lions. So I expect the Packers to win this one in a really tough matchup, maybe a game-winning field goal at the end of the game. But I look for Jordan Love to have a nice game and to hopefully continue his turnover-less streak and look for 3 straight games without an interception for Jordan Love.
Yeah, if you want any chance against the Lions, you need a turnoverless game by Jordan Love, because just the way they can run their offense, the way their defense is so good, the way they control the time of possession more than anything. If you have more than one, or even one in most case scenarios, turnovers against the Lions, yeah, you're screwed. I mean, there's just no chance. I do like the point you made that they're most susceptible to losing to the NFC North, because it's very true. I mean, I can't remember exactly how close the Packers played them, but the Bears, of course, just last week played them very closely and could have won. And the Vikings also could have and probably should have won when we played them in US Bank Stadium. So those divisional games seem to get to them, which, I mean, divisional games can get to any team, but the fact that it happens so consistently shows that there's a chance.
The last Packers-Lions game was when Jordan Love had that groin injury. So
he
wasn't 100%.
Yeah. So that does make, so then there you go. I mean, I think
and
even,
that was only 24-14.
As I say, and I think that was even a relatively close game. So they were getting the other team starting quarterback not at 100% and still didn't even really put up their best performance. But all that being said, those are very good points. But the common thread there is they did win all of those games. Even though they could have lost, even though they should have lost, they still found ways to win. And that's what has made the Lions so good this year, is just finding ways to win. So even with Jordan Love at 100%, even if Jordan Love doesn't throw an interception and the Packers have no turnovers, I still think the Lions just find ways to win because they are such a good football team. And more than anything, just such a complete football team, all the way from special teams to coaching, both sides of the ball, all 11 positions, just really good from top to bottom. And those are the hardest teams to beat. You can find ways to beat those top-heavy teams. You can find ways to beat the teams with a lot of heart. But when you have a team like the Lions that have a lot of heart and have studs at each and every position, you better hope that you find them on a bad day, or else you're going to be taking a loss yourself. And I think the Packers do that this week. So now moving down the list, just one spot to a AFC North divisional matchup with the Cleveland Browns heading to Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers. And we split again. I have the Steelers in this one, and Callan has the Browns.
Yeah, I like the Browns in this one because we just talked about it. Divisional matchups are just a different type of football. And for whatever reason, the Browns own their own division. They can't win games outside of their division, but they're owning games within their division. And even though that doesn't usually always guarantee you a playoff record, you got to beat some of those teams outside your division. It still looks really good for the future. And the Browns, led by Jameis Winston, who had 2 pick sixes last week, I think he bounces back from that and has another stellar game with over 300 yards passing and a couple of touchdowns, hopefully none to the other team. But if he's able to keep the ball from turning over, and if his prayers are answered, and as Jameis Winston says, if he can be delivered from those pick sixes, I expect the Browns to upset the Steelers this week in Pittsburgh.
His stat line was 3 interceptions with 2 of them being pick sixes. But he also backed those 3 interceptions up with 4 touchdowns and 3 yards short of 500 passing yards, which is, if that's not a Tampa Bay prime Jameis Winston stat line, I don't know what is. But back to the present, back to this game and our prediction. I actually ended up taking the Steelers in this one, which I know is the dead opposite of what I said the last time these two teams played, because I said the Browns have the Steelers number. I don't know why, but the Browns always find ways to beat the Steelers.
You convinced me.
And it's true. They won. They beat them in that game, but they had a lot more going for them. It was in Cleveland. They had kind of the flukiness or unpredictableness of the snowy weather in that game in Cleveland, and they're not going to have that anymore. It's going to be in Pittsburgh's home field. I don't know the weather for sure. We'll have to see come Sunday, but I don't think it's supposed to be snowy or anything like it was in Cleveland. And more than anything, I just don't see lightning striking twice. I kind of want the Browns to win. I really like the Browns. I, of course, love Jameis Winston, and I do believe that the Browns do, in some weird way, kind of have the Steelers number. But I think that the Steelers are just going to be way too hyped up for this game. Myles Garrett never actually left the game injured, but he clearly was not 100% last Monday against the Denver Broncos, and I think that transfers into this game. And look for TJ Watt to have a huge game. I mean, for TJ Watt to have such a quiet game like he did in that Thursday night football game against the Browns, and then have to watch the interview of Myles Garrett talk about how the Defensive Player of the Year runs through him and he's the number one, he's the big dog. If that doesn't light a fire under your ass, I don't know what does. So look for TJ Watt to be a man on a mission during this game this week. So now moving on to our next game, we have not only the Minnesota Vikings game, but actually what we marked as the game of the week, because it is the Kirk Cousins revenge game and his return to US Bank Stadium. We have the Atlanta Falcons heading to Minneapolis and US Bank Stadium to take on the Vikings. And we disagree again here. Callan actually takes Kirko and the Falcons, but I, of course, am sticking with the Minnesota Vikings. Talked about this a lot last week, but I think that last week against the Arizona Cardinals was one of our sloppier games of the entire year. And we were still able to pick up a win against a not amazing team, but a really good team, a really middle-of-the-pack team. And I think that's exactly what the Atlanta Falcons are. So we have that home field advantage again, 2 weeks in a row at home games. And we have the Falcons team coming in. And don't get me wrong, Kurt's going to have a lot of motivation. He's going to have a lot of things working in his favor. He looked really bad last week against the Chargers. He had at least one, or at least 2, if not 3 interceptions, one of them being a dagger of a red zone interception when the Falcons were knocking on the door of taking the lead. So even if he has a lot of motivation from returning home to US Bank Stadium, from the woes of last week. He has a lot going for him, but I think the Vikings are still able to pick out a win, because one thing that the Vikings haven't done this year is back up a sloppy game with another sloppy game. And that's the big reason we're 10-2 right now. Even when we've played poorly and even when we've picked up those 2 losses, we've been able to follow up those with wins in really good games to kind of fix our own woes, like I just kind of touched on with Kirk Cousins there. So even with the Falcons having a lot of momentum rolling for them coming into US Bank Stadium, I think that the Vikings are able to get it together, and I think we stonewall any momentum that the Falcons do have coming in and pick up another home win.
If they do, it'll be a tough one, because if anyone knows how to defeat that Brian Flores defense, it's the person that's been practicing against it the last 2 years, minus this year, and that's Kirk Cousins, who comes in not only motivated, but also with all the knowledge of the Vikings, because they haven't changed their coaching staff really in the past couple of years. So there really isn't any scheme changes. So it'll be interesting to see how much knowledge and how much that really pays off for Kirk Cousins, if that really does benefit him in the long run. But either way, I see the Falcons coming away with this one because they're on a 3-game losing streak. And I don't see the Falcons winning or losing 4 games this year. With Bijan Robinson at running back, they're starting to give him the ball more and phase out Tyler Algier. And even though that's not leading to victories, it will eventually lead to victories. And I could see this being one of those victories this week as Kirk O'Chains makes his return to Minnesota and what should be a primetime game, but it's a Sunday noon game for Kirk Chains.
Yeah, looking at the primetime games, especially the Monday night game, I don't think they can flex into the Monday night game, but regardless, I don't know how this game didn't get flexed. There's so much behind it, but I digress. I think it's the game of the week, the Fox game of the week or whichever one. So at least it did get that. But one point you made that I love is that he was going against this defense last year, in practice, 1s versus 1s. But one kind of counter argument to that'll be really interesting to keep an eye on is when he was doing those 1s versus 1s, he was used to seeing Danielle Hunter and DJ Wanham lined up against him. Both guys who are no longer there, and 2 guys that are now starting that weren't even there last year when he was there, and Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, with guys who he is more familiar with, like Patrick Jones rotating in there as well, and rookie Dallas Turner. So I guess he did, so 3 new guys, because Dallas Turner's a rookie. So scheme hasn't changed, but all the faces have. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of changes things there. So now moving on just a little bit down the board to another divisional matchup, this time in the NFC West. We have the Seattle Seahawks heading to Arizona to take on the Cardinals, and we both agree this time. We both have the Cardinals in this one, and I took the Cardinals for one main reason, and that is they came off of a relatively sloppy game and a loss last week. The Seahawks came off of what was also a relatively sloppy game, but a win last week. So the big kind of thing for the Cardinals right now is they realize with how well the 3 wild card teams and the Vikings, Packers, and Commanders are doing right now, their only real shot at making the playoffs this year is by winning the NFC West, because the NFC West is wide open, and they're now 2 games behind the Seahawks after a Seattle win and Arizona loss last week. So that's going to give them so much motivation. They're back on their home turf. It's not a huge travel for the Seahawks, but it is a relatively big travel, especially for that NFC West area. So I think that the Cardinals just have a lot going for them right now. I think that they're going to fix the mistakes they made last week, and especially in the red zone, start turning a lot of those field goals last week into touchdowns this week against a little bit lower level of a defense, even though they got a very good secondary there in Seattle. But nonetheless, I do see an Arizona win on this one and them closing that gap in the NFC West.
Yeah, this will be a very entertaining game to watch. Kyler Murray versus Geno Smith on the offensive side of the ball. But it'll be very entertaining because it'll be interesting to see the running back battle of Kenneth Walker versus James Conner. And see, I think the team that wins is the team that has the best rushing performance. And that's whether that's rushing with James Conner and Kyler Murray or Geno and Kenneth Walker. But I think the Cardinals, not only being the home team, but I think they come out on top of the rushing game as well. And I've said this before, and I've noticed in games that the Cardinals do well, James Conner does well. So if I expect James Conner to do very well in this matchup, a divisional matchup for them, And I think that the Cardinals are able to walk away with this one pretty easily and keep that NFC West race very tight.
Yeah, two of the last few in a dying breed of workhorse running backs, James
Mm-hmm.
Conner and Kenneth Walker are. So that's a good point. The kind of marquee matchup is the Geno Smith versus Kyler Murray, but I think the even better matchup, you're spot on, might be Kenneth Walker versus James Conner. So now moving down to our primetime games and the final two games we'll talk about this week, starting with Sunday Night Football and an AFC West matchup this time around with the Los Angeles Chargers heading to Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. And we agree on this one, but we both have the Chargers, and I actually have the Chargers marked as my upset. After watching the Chiefs versus Raiders game last week, there was no way I wasn't going to pick the Chargers in this one.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of ironic to come full circle because we were talking about the number one team in the NFC struggling in divisional games. Now we'll talk about the number one team in the AFC struggling in division games. Though they have won every division game they've played this year, they have all been very close and all came down to really flukes, with them just barely beating the Broncos off of a blocked field goal and then just barely beating the Raiders off of the botched snap from rookie center to Aiden O'Connell. So when they're just barely picking up these wins by the most random, almost quote unquote undeserving ways, I mean, eventually it's going to bite them. And the Chargers are on an absolute hot streak right now, kind of similar to what I touched on with the Vikings. I think that they looked very sloppy last week against the Atlanta Falcons, but we're still able to walk away with a win. So when you can look sloppy and walk away with a win, I think that nothing makes you look in the mirror more and be like, we didn't deserve that one. We need to play better, which I know is a little counterproductive because the Chiefs could very much be seeing the same thing with the way that the Raiders played, or they played against the Raiders, I should say, last week. But I think that the Chargers just have a lot more motivation than the Chiefs do right now. For the first time in a while, they kind of see the Chiefs as a wounded animal, for lack of a better term, and they kind of know that they have the power right now with how well Justin Herbert's been playing to strike and take advantage of that, and maybe not quite make a push at the AFC West, because I believe the Chiefs have already claimed that, but can very much make a push to kind of get a statement win and really lock themselves in the driver's seat of getting a wild card spot in that AFC playoff race. So lots of things going for the Chargers right now, hence why I took them as my upset.
Yeah, I like the Chargers in this one. I don't have them as my upset of the week, but I do like them in this upset of a game because the Chiefs are likely to be favored even as the home team. But I think that Jim Harbaugh is leading a very disciplined team into Arrowhead, and it's very different than any teams that the Chiefs have. It's much different Chargers team than the Chiefs have faced in the past, because this is a run-based team, a ground and pound team. With even though J.K. Dobbins is out, he is going to miss this week with his knee injury, but they just activated Gus Edwards, so he'll be looking to pick up the slack. And I expect the Chargers to be able to run all over this Chiefs defense, where they're kind of led by their secondary. So if they are able to shut out Chris Jones and keep him from really making an impact on the game, I expect the Chargers to be able to win this one. And also, I think the Chargers maybe have the better offense. Even though the Chiefs did recently pick up DeAndre Hopkins to kind of give them a new spark, the Chargers offense has been clicking with Ladd McConkey. Is it Demarius Davis, their kick returner?
Yeah, yep. I think so.
Davis,
I think so, yep.
Electric kick returner, and Quentin Johnston, who's proving to be worthy of that first-round pick. So it'll be interesting to see which receiver really steps up. I really like the way Ladd McConkey has played this year. I think that he's a dark horse for Rookie of the Year this year. And just because of his consistent play, he's consistently putting up big numbers each week and averaging just about a touchdown a game. So I expect another touchdown from Ladd McConkey and look for the Chargers to pull a big upset this week against the Chiefs.
Yeah, Quentin Johnson has been playing really well when he's able to hold on to the ball. He has had some drop issues, but when he's able to kind of get out of his own head and catch the ball, he's looked really good. But Ladd McConkey has been their wide receiver one from that slot position, which I did not expect to say. If anything, I actually kind of expected Brendan Rice to step up and kind of be their star rookie. but he's been a little quiet, but he'll be able to get his chance later down the road. A guy who may get his chance in this game and to keep an eye out for is Hassan Haskins, who will now be the backup running back behind Gus Edwards for the Chargers. He hasn't got a ton of opportunity, but I think he's looked pretty decent when he has gotten the opportunity. So if they actually give him a good handful of carries, keep an eye for him to have 1 or 2 big runs, or at the very least, a goal line touchdown, because that man is strong. But moving on to our final game we're going to talk about with the Monday Night Football game, and probably one of the worst games we're going to talk about. We have the Cincinnati Bengals heading to Dallas to take on the Cowboys in a non-conference matchup. And we finished this week off by agreeing. We both have the Bengals in this one. Not really a ton to say here from my side of things. The Bengals have looked so good. They've put up so many yards and they've put up so many points. But they have just not been able to translate any of that play into wins, which is so sad to see for a team because they really have just played their hearts out. But the offense has played their hearts out, I should say, because the defense has very much let them down week after week. But that makes the Cowboys an absolute perfect matchup for them right now, because though the Cowboys' defense for the most part is intact, that's going to be a good strength versus strength with the Cincinnati Bengals going against that Cowboys defense. The Cowboys' offense is absolutely in shambles right now. They're able to put up just under 30 against the Giants, but the Giants are the only team more in shambles, and they're ironically in the same division. But yeah, I just see the Bengals absolutely taking out all their frustrations on the Giants on this one. Give me the Bengals to put up over 40 points and the Cowboys to not even hit 20. I see this one being a blowout.
Yeah, this is going to be a similar game to all Cowboys home games this year, where they are allowing or have been down by 20 plus points in almost every home game this year except the one that they won, which was last week against the Giants. So because of that, I expect the Bengals to walk away with this one pretty easily. The Cowboys, like you said, the offense is not clicking. When you lose Dak Prescott and you got Cooper Rush, Cooper Rush is a nice story. He's a good backup quarterback, but he's not a starting caliber quarterback in the NFL. And you really are starting to see it late as we get late into the season here, that he's just not that starting caliber type of quarterback. And he's just not the quarterback that the Cowboys need right now. Maybe it'd be worth it for him to give Trey Lance a try and maybe give us some spark. But in his few relief appearances, Trey Lance has not been very astonishing either. So it's really it's a lot of trouble for the Dallas Cowboys right now. And because of that, I expect the Bengals to win this one. Look for Jamar Chase to have another huge game and Joe Burrow to have another huge game. Where if the Bengals would win games and not let the defense lose their games, the Bengals and Joe Burrow might be an MVP candidate, because the Bengals defense has allowed 36 points 6 times this year.
Ooh.
So, and they've lost all 6 of those games, obviously. So it's just really a bad time for the Bengals defense, and this could end up being a shootout on Monday night, because if the Cowboys offense is able to get anything going with CeeDee Lamb, look for a CeeDee Lamb versus Jamar Chase shootout type of game, and what could end up being very entertaining.
Yeah. Fear not. The Cowboys will continue to play their hardest. They will not tank for a draft pick. They never will. They won't touch the playoffs, but they will play themselves out of a top 10 pick and end up getting, I don't know, probably like Ashton Genty later in the first round or something like that.
That seems to be what a lot of mock drafts are saying.
But it just never fails. That whenever the Cowboys look bad and they're not going to make the playoffs, they still just refuse to give up, which I guess is nice. But at the same time, it's like, maybe let it die. Go get yourself a good draft pick.
Yeah.
But I digress. So thank you all so much for watching this episode of our Week 14 predictions for the NFL. Make sure you stay tuned in until next week, when we, of course, have our Week 14 recap and get into our first week without buys and our first true week of the playoff picture molding itself with our Week 15 predictions. But until then, don't forget
to eat the W.